Tech Cocktail Sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
So I'm an academic. I'm used to standing and talking, and I can talk for a really long time, so I'm just going to try and be really brief here. And first, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background. Jen mentioned a couple of projects that I've worked on. I'll give you the really brief takeaways in case you don't want to read the books. The first one is I've studied players for more than a decade. I really enjoy talking to people about why they play games, how they fit them into their lives, why they make the choices that they do. And I actually think that a lot of things that people say about their gameplay can relate to their other activities, either online or with other people or in other kinds of communities. So with cheating, I was curious about how people approach cheating in video games, probably because I was a professor and people were cheating in my classes, and I was like, gosh, this is horrible, and why are they doing this? And it turns out that actually in games, almost everybody cheats, but almost nobody wants to. It's an interesting conundrum because most people really want the sense of accomplishment and achievement that they get from games. Sadly, this does not apply as much at school these days. I think that schools are a little bit broken. But in games, people really don't want to cheat, and they would kind of go out of their way not to cheat, or they just wouldn't enjoy the game as much. But that's kind of the takeaway from cheating. And with the sports video games book, this was a book I edited with a couple of colleagues. Sports video games are this huge genre of games that almost nobody studies and understands. And it's really a shame. People think that they're just not very interesting. But we did a survey of players and asked them, like, what do you play and why? And, how does this relate to your life? And we asked an optional question about, what's a memorable experience that you had playing a sports video game? And we had hundreds of replies to this optional question with people talking about these deep and meaningful experiences that they had. It was mostly men who responded to our survey, but they talked about playing with their brothers, with their uncles, with their best friends, playing at their bachelor parties, and they would give these detailed accounts of this sports video game that they played and how it related to their relationships with these people. And so I think that games are these really interesting spaces where people have these experiences. I also helped with a team try and develop a game to see if I could understand them better as I was putting them together. And I learned two important things here. One is that it's a really bad idea to try and develop a game for Facebook when your team leaves the day that you launch it, because then Facebook immediately changes its protocols and your game breaks. So we had this great game that no one could ever play. I also learned a little bit about diversity in putting together a team, and that it's not enough to just create a diverse team and expect diversity to ensue in your game design, but I can talk about that more in the Q&A if you have more questions about it. So really what I want to talk or focus on now is some research that I did with one of my graduate students, Jason Beggy. We got to study this casual online game called Faunasphere. It was in existence for about 2 years. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because I'm guessing that probably nobody here ever played it. And that's probably the reason why it went out of business. But it was this interesting online space, and because it was only around for 2 years, we actually got to see it from the end of its beta through its launch. It was on the web, it went to Facebook, and then it sunset. And what I think this shows is, and what I'm going to talk a little bit about, is just the importance of a beta community and how that impacts the player community, and also the importance of the sunset. So the beta period, which we asked players about and we got to witness a little bit about, was really incredibly important for shaping the overall tone of the player community. The company that created Faunasphere is Big Fish Games, and they mostly drew from their current customer base when they were looking at this game. They actually created before this mostly single-player hidden object games, and their audience was mostly older adult women. They were playing single-player PC games. So this was kind of a new experiment for them to try this different type of game. And they were drawing from this group that had most of the time never played online games, multiplayer games. A lot of them didn't know what a massively multiplayer online game was, but they were really interested to try because it was this company that they liked and trusted. And so they became their beta players and their beta testers. And what developed was this sort of interesting little community where, if you know anything about games and beta communities, most of the time they're kind of nasty places where people are overly critical. And this was something totally different. Everybody helped each other out. There was a code of niceness. People went out of their way to help each other in the forums, in the game. You know, they said, you know, we really don't understand what's going on, but we're all going to kind of band together and work through this. And so they created this really interesting and tight-knit, wonderful little community. And then the game launched, and newer players started coming in, and there was this interesting backlash that developed. And what we think happened was, you know, anytime there are new people, newcomers to a group, there's always going to be a little struggle over how are things going to work out. You know, are these the norms that we're going to stick with, or you know, are things going to shift? And what's interesting here is that even though these were players who said, you know, we value niceness and politeness, there were other people who were suddenly opposed to this type of gameplay, saying, no, that's not how we want to play. And they were seeing those beta players as cliquish, as insiders. And it was this really interesting situation suddenly where the nice people were suddenly perceived as the mean people. And what I think it shows is, you know, you have to be really careful about, you know, who's in your beta community. They are people who are going to influence the culture. But there's just going to inevitably be some kind of backlash against them, you know, when you go into a wider release, because they are seen as the insiders. They are the ones who are going to be viewed as the experts, and not everybody wants to necessarily view others as the experts. You know, this was a game with a very compressed time frame. You know, probably the longer a product is out, if you think of something like World of Warcraft, now nobody really thinks about who is in beta. But for that immediate time frame, it's a really important thing to consider. Those are just some of the avatars from what Faunasphere looked like. You had these little animals that you hopped around, you zapped pollution. When you zapped enough pollution, you laid an egg, and then you could hatch eggs and hatch new types of fauna. So I mentioned it launched originally on the web, and then Big Fish decided to bring it to Facebook. This is the era of Farmville, Castleville, and so there's this huge audience, and I'm sure they were thinking, you know, we can widen our demographic, our audience a lot by bringing this new player base to the game. What I don't think that they considered was the importance of platforms, and that there are different groups of people on different types of platforms, and also that people have different expectations for gameplay or just activity in general on different platforms. Because what people were used to on Facebook, if you played lots of games on Facebook at the time, was that Farmville style of play. You know, it was you just send your friend requests for ribbons, and you expect to get things back. It wasn't that you asked them super nice. It was just a very automated thing. This clashed a lot with the style of Faunasphere gameplay, where you were supposed to ask politely, you were very nice, you chatted people up. It was a space where you were supposed to hang out, as opposed to that very utilitarian style. And so again, there was another backlash. The important thing was the platform really mattered. So people weren't necessarily playing with their friends. They were suddenly playing with strangers, and they didn't really like it. Again, those beta players, those early players, were suddenly confronted with a different style of play, and a lot of them didn't really react very well. There wasn't a lot of feedback from the company about, you know, this new and shifting style of play, or players were managing these things. And so those original players started retreating to their closed networks, to their own private spaces, or some of them stopped playing the game. I mentioned this was a very quick game. About 6 months later, Big Fish announced that the game was going to close. They put up an announcement on their boards. I think the moderators made another announcement, maybe in-game, and they told everybody that they had a month to go before the game finally shut down. And they pretty much said that it was just, I think, financially untenable. And there was a brief, you know, FAQ that they put up, and that was about it. And people were really predictably upset about this. Can talk about some of the other reactions later. But I think, first of all, one thing I should point out, and we were kind of struck by as researchers, is that a lot of the players really didn't have a real understanding of how the financials of the business worked. And, you know, it was, easy to say like, oh, well, shouldn't they? But why should they really? They weren't provided a lot of information. People offered suggestions like, I will pay 3 times the subscription that I'm currently paying, or maybe the customers can buy the game from the developer, or maybe they should try and sell it to another company. And the thing is, they really had no sense, and the company really didn't try and educate them into, these are the things that we tried, or this is why this is, not possible. And so players were just sort of left to speculate, and they were very upset. And they also felt like they were not just losing a community of people that they enjoyed, but I showed you the pets. They were losing access to those pets that they had really formed this close relationship with. When the game did shut down, those are more of the fauna. They got this screen, and then the game was poof, gone, and so were the forums that were associated with it. Ironically, many of them ended up gathering on Facebook. They formed a group there, and they started looking for other games to go into to see if there was anything sort of comparable out there, that they could try and hang out in. And what I think this shows is, it's really important. These were also a lot of these original beta players. These were the people who were originally very loyal to this company. They were very angry. They were very upset, and they felt like they had not been listened to. Beyond the initial announcement, there was really no other discussion with them, and they felt like this company had betrayed them. And many of them said they would no longer buy games from the company, they would no longer frequent the site, and so it was really just sort of an abrupt break and a poor ending for them. Ironically, a number of them ended up going to another MMO called Glitch, not quite the same, but a little quirky also. And they felt like they were being welcomed there. Ironically, it was in closed alpha at the time that Faunasphere was ending, and so they jumped over. The creators let them form their own little group. They had a good time. Glitch ended up closing. But what was different here is that when Glitch was closing, they posted multiple information sheets about what was going on, the different things that they'd tried in terms of funding. They also told people we're going to release, open source a lot of the artwork. They released art books about the game. I think they had plush toys. And so the players of Glitch felt like they had been listened to. They had an adequate explanation for what was going on, and they felt like the company was on their side, that it wasn't the company just imposing this. The company really had tried everything. And so people felt still sad, but much more reassured that they were being listened to, and much more loyal going forward for anything that the company might try. And so just to conclude, I think that, as I mentioned, I study people who play games. Some of them would identify as gamers. Most of them really don't. They consider themselves people who might play games, but a lot of what they're interested in is communities and spaces and play, and a lot of the things that they do online are things that they do in other spaces as well. And it's really about how they want to be listened to, how they want to be treated, and the companies that do listen to them are the ones that I think they really respect and want to spend their time with.